Hello and welcome to our presentation on learning theories, comparing behaviorism, cognitism, and constructivism. Linda Harrison, in her writings on learning theory and online technology, notes that it is essential that educators understand the context of a learning theory, to understand it as a product of the discourse of that time. Theories should not be viewed as something divorced from how we work as educators or how we understand our professional activities. According to Dr. Ari, learning theories are descriptive. They explain how learning occurs, whereas instructional theories are prescriptive. They provide step-by-step guidance to carry out the instruction. The role of theory is that it explains the why, how, where, when, and what. It provides a framework or lens, a guide for practice, and a means to envision change. It shapes understanding, discourse, idea, technology, methodology, and actions. According to Harrison again, the theory we apply even unknowingly shapes how we design and implement our practice. Therefore, we present to you a comparison of three learning theories: behaviorism, cognitism, and constructivism. An important part of the teaching education is understanding different ways of learning, especially since no two students are alike, and the way every person learns will vary. Psychologists have spent countless hours performing tests to better understand how students learn, and many learning theories exist that teachers can explore as they prepare to help students in the classroom. Learning theories can use different techniques in their classroom to cater to different kinds of learning. According to Etmer and Newby, they state that in selecting the theory, whose associated instruction strategies offer the optimal means for achieving desired outcomes, the degree of cognitive processes required of learners by the specific task appear to be critical factors. Furthermore, designers must understand the position of the practitioner. First up, we will discuss behaviorism. According to Etmer and Newby, behaviorists equate learning with changes in either the form or frequency of observable performance. Learning is accomplished when a proper response is demonstrated following the presentation of a specific environmental stimulus. The key elements are the stimulus, the response, and the association between the two. A primary concern is how the association between the stimulus and the response is made, strengthened, and maintained. Behaviorist focuses on the importance of consequences of those performance and contends that the responses are followed by reinforcement and are more likely to reoccur in the future. Learning based on behavioral theory, while a bit rigid and limited, are specified, qualifiable, and terminal behaviors. It is empirical, observable, measurable approach to learning. Stimulus can be observed quantitatively, totally ignoring the possibility of thought or process occurring in the mind. It is focused on what is observable, how people behave, change, or elicit particular behaviors, and lends itself to discrete learning steps. According to Brenda Mergel, behavioralism is based on observable changes in behavior. Behaviorism focuses on a new behavioral pattern being repeated until it becomes automatic. The three major types of behavioral learning include classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and social cognitive theory. Classical conditioning is a technique used in behavioral training in which a natural occurring stimulus is paired with a response. Next, a previously neutral stimulus is paired with the natural occurring stimulus. Eventually, the previous neutral stimulus comes to evolve. Operant conditioning is a method of learning that occurs through rewards and punishments for behavior. Through operant conditioning, an association is made between a behavior and a consequence for that behavior. Key terms on this are positive reinforcement and punishment. And then we have social cognitive theory. Social cognitive theory is more specific and detailed element of the social learning theory. It takes the idea that people learn from one another and add personal or cognitive factors, the behavior itself and the environment, as combination factors for determining learning and behavior. In behaviorist theory, learners are more passive in the learning process. According to Etmer and Newby, the learner is characterized as being reactive to conditions in the environment, as opposed to taking an active role in discovering the environment. The learner's role is simply to respond to the learning content and demonstrate a level of performance on a specific goal and objective. On the other hand, the teacher's role is to provide the correct stimuli to shape or condition the student into the desired end product. The teacher provides the necessary inputs to get the desired outputs. Teachers possess knowledge, and it is their responsibility to impart facts and desired behaviors to the students. Teachers control students' behavior and learning with stimulus control via evaluation, repetition, and reinforcement techniques. According to Etmer and Newby, the goal of instruction for behaviorists is to elicit the desired response from the learner, who is represented with target stimulus. The most critical factor is the arrangement of stimuli and consequences within the environmental, and these consequences receive the greatest emphasis. Assessing the learners to determine at what point to begin instruction, as well as to determine which reinforcers are most effective for a particular student. As noted in Etmer and Newby's article, Update, with the explosion of technology, including online learning, behaviorism has almost become outdated, with a few exceptions such as gaming. Here are several key contributors and their contribution. Here are a few of the strengths and weaknesses. Next up is cognitism.
In cognitivism, learning is defined as the acquisition or reorganization of cognitive structures through which humans process and store information. Here are some key principles of cognitivism in relation to instructional design. First, there should be emphasis on the active involvement of the learner in the learning process. Also, there should be a use of hierarchical analysis to identify and illustrate prerequisite relationships. Third, there should be an emphasis on structuring, organizing, and sequencing information. And finally, fourth, The learning environment should be created in such a way that allows and encourages students to make connections with previously learned material. In cognitivism, the role of the learner is to be an active participant. Cognitive theorists are not so much concerned about what learners do, but what they know and how they come to acquire it. Cognitive theory seeks to change the learner by encouraging them to use appropriate learning strategies. According to cognitive theorists, the instructor's role should be consistent with making knowledge meaningful and help learners organize and integrate new information into existing knowledge and memory. They can do this by recognizing the individual differences in their students, build on their students' prior knowledge, and provide practice and feedback for their students. Here are some of the key contributors to cognitivism. Jerome Bruner, who conducted research on cognitive development of children, is most known for his 3 modes of representation. Jean Piaget, and his theory on cognitive development, which has 4 stages. Lee Vykowski, he's most known for his social development theory. This theory states that cognitive processes are developed through social interaction. And Albert Bandura is known for his social learning theory. Social learning theory considers how both environmental and cognitive factors interact to influence human learning and behavior. Here are some strengths and weaknesses of cognitivism.
To this point, we have talked about behaviorism and cognitivism. Lastly, we're going to talk about constructivism. Constructivism. How is learning defined? So knowledge is constructed by the learner through a variety of experiences. Most of these experiences tend to be social in nature and involve other people. The goal is to involve both the teacher and the learner together. Both are actively engaged. The teacher facilitating an experience that helps the learner make connections to the real world for relevancy, and the learner engaging with the teacher and the overall experience. Learning must be an active process, not passive. So unlike behavioralism, the teacher and learner are involved in a joint enterprise with the teacher and peers creating or constructing meaning. Basically, we make meaning by doing. So what are the key principles of constructivism? So the 2 major epistemologies of the 20th and 21st century were objectivist and constructivist. Constructivism was a reaction to behaviorism and cognitivism. It was influenced by psychological research coinciding with the educational reform movement in the United States. The key concept of constructivism is that humans are active creators of knowledge and that in many ways learning is social. Viewing constructivism on a continuum, there are 3 subtypes of constructivism. Cognitive constructivism emphasizes procedures and processes of learning, organization of learning within the mind, and symbolization of learning within the mind. Whereas social constructivism emphasizes creating meaning within social activity and is less concerned about the structure and organization of learning. And lastly, radical constructivism emphasizes the actual process of learning, organization of learning, and the construction of personal meaning for the learner. Constructivism. What's the role of the learner? So learners should be active, engaged, and social. Learners need to gain knowledge through their experiences. Learning should be authentic and situational and relevant to the learner's lives. Without relevancy, it becomes harder for the learner to make meaning of the experience. Testing learning should happen through the process of learning and not as some separate entity at the end. Basically, learning needs to be active and not passive, and the learner should be engaged in their experiences, and that learning should be situated in a realistic setting, and that testing should be integrated and not a separate activity, the way that, for the most part, K through 12 education is today, where you go through a unit, and at the end of the unit, you have a test. In constructivist theory, that should be embedded throughout the process. Constructivism. What's the role of the instructor or trainer? Well, truth be told, what I really should have up here is the facilitator. So understand that teachers in a constructivist mindset are no longer the sage on the stage, whereby we are the keepers and distributors of knowledge. Teaching should actually be more of a facilitation type activity. That facilitation should be designed in such a way as to create rich experiences that are, again, relevant to students' lives and give opportunities for feedback, for students to work collaboratively with other peers and have quality discussion where they can make meaning of their learning. So essentially, this learning should be social and collaborative in nature, and it is up to the teacher or facilitator to make sure that the activities that they're doing are going to give those experiences to the students. And some of the things that a teacher would do is they're going to model what they want for the students. They may coach them along the way and kind of scaffold them to get where they want to go. But ultimately, it is up to the student to make meaning of the experiences that the facilitator gives them. Constructivism. Who are the key contributors? So the key contributors to constructivism are 2 psychological researchers, Jean Piaget, who developed the theory of cognitive development, and Lev Vygotsky, who developed the sociocultural theory. Piaget's theory of cognitive development influenced constructivism because he suggests that we move through 4 stages of mental development. Children, he believed, took an active role in learning. They made observations, interacted with the world, added new knowledge, and built upon previous experiences. Vygotsky, on the other hand, influenced constructivism with his sociocultural theory. The theory said that children develop through learning cultural values, beliefs, and other skills through a collaborative dialogue. Essentially, he felt social interaction was fundamental to making meaning. And both of these contributors play an important role in the underlying psychological underpinnings of constructivism and how we actually make meaning of our learning. So constructivism, just like any other learning theory, has some strengths and some weaknesses. So we're going to look at a few of the strengths and weaknesses within that theory. So starting off with the strengths, learning is a social activity. That means that you are going to have others involved, which typically is going to make learning more active and less passive. And learning is going to be adaptive. it's subjective. It's not necessarily did you get 2 plus 2 on a test equals 4. There may be multiple ways to come to the right answer, or multiple right answers depending on how you look at what it is you're supposed to have learned. Learners are in some ways actually better able to deal with real life situations simply because of the fact that they are in a position to construct meaning through their experiences. So they may draw on previous experiences to handle a new experience. This theory is typically good for higher order thinking skills, and it encourages that active learning, not passive learning. On the other hand, some of the weaknesses are that you are actually relying on others to construct new knowledge, right? And it doesn't necessarily work when the goal is conformity. 2 plus 2 equals 4, and there's no changing that. That is just fact. So when you think about constructivism, you have to understand that in some ways, when you are looking for everyone to conform and have the right answer, that constructivist mindset may or may not be the best. And it really truly is not necessarily appropriate for those lower order thinking skills where you are looking at more rote memorization of content. So what are some of the strategies in terms of teachers facilitating a learning environment within a constructivist framework? So there are a couple things that are important. First off, learning needs to be democratic. So that means that the students need to play an active role in how they're learning, and in some ways what they're learning as well. That learning needs to be active. So they should be talking, discussing, doing things that are going to help them make meaning. And those activities, again, should be very student-centered. So like an example of those activities might be experimentation or research projects, or doing research for a discussion and a debate. Those are all things that are active, and depending on the situation can very, very much be group-centered. An experiment could have multiple people in it. A research project, same deal. And again, the same when it comes to discussion and debate. So on one level, while you may have students produce an individual assignment, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And even if they have produced an assignment individually, they have probably come to the understanding and meaning for their learning through discussing and doing other activities that are social that engage other learners as well. So in closing, when we look at kind of the benefits or think about the pros and cons of behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism, they all have some things that are very positive in terms of the learning theory, but also some drawbacks. So in terms of behaviorism, teaching methods have proven most successful in areas where there is a correct response and it's easy to memorize the material. It is unfortunately more teacher-centered, not learner-centered, more focused on those rote memorization and lower order thinking skills. Now, cognitivism kind of builds on that and promotes a more active learner that encourages mental processes such as goal setting and organizational strategies. But it assumes that all cognitive processes are the same, and it is more learner-centered than behavioralism, but is not completely learner-centered the way that constructivism is. Now, constructivism is a reaction to behaviorism and cognitivism, and it actually builds on those traditions, and it is very learner-centered, and it's extremely useful when we're looking at higher order thinking skills. It isn't necessarily the best, though, when we need a correct response, and sometimes when answers kind of lack conformity, that can cause issues when the response needs to conform to a right or wrong scenario. Please take just a quick look at this chart, which kind of compares behaviorism, cognitive constructivism, and social constructivism. It isn't directly comparing cognitivism per se, but we still felt like it was a very useful graphic because it shows the view of knowledge, learning, motivation, and implications for teaching. So in wrapping up our presentation, we need to give credit where credit's due.